Alright, so you're not going to believe this, but I gotta tell you about this insane thing that happened to me in Florida. I was staying over at my buddy's place in Pensacola, right on the Gulf Coast. Nice area, pretty chill, but nothing out of the ordinary. Until that night. It was a regular evening. We had some pizza, played a few video games, typical stuff. We were just hanging out in his backyard, catching up. The night was clear, stars out and everything. So we're sitting there, and I'm looking up at the sky, and I see this light. At first, I thought it was just a plane or something. But then, man, it started moving weird. Like, not in a straight line, but zigzagging, super fast. I pointed it out to my friend, and he's like, yeah, probably just a drone or something. But I knew it wasn't. It was too high up and too fast. We kept watching, and this light, it just stops moving. Like, dead in the sky. Just hangs there. Then, out of nowhere, more lights appear, forming this circle around the first light. They were all this eerie, bright white. Not blinking or anything, just steady. My friend's getting freaked out at this point. He's like, dude, what is that? And honestly, I had no clue. We're both standing there staring at these lights, and suddenly, they start moving together, like in a formation, slowly descending. They're getting closer, and I'm starting to see this shape, this massive circular thing. It wasn't making any sound, totally silent, which was the weirdest part. It's getting lower and lower, and now I can see it clearly. It's this huge metallic-looking disc, like something straight out of a movie, with these lights around its edge. It gets to about treetop level, just hovering there, and then it just shoots up into the sky, like faster than anything I've ever seen. For a few moments, my friend and I just stood there silent, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. I mean, what do you even do after seeing something like that? Then, just as we started to talk about what we had seen, trying to make sense of it, there's this sound. It's hard to describe, kind of a low hum like a transformer, but it felt like it was vibrating in my chest, We both froze, looking around to see where it was coming from. And that's when things got even weirder. From the same spot in the sky where the UFO had shot up, these lights start appearing again, one by one, same bright white lights. But this time, they're moving differently, kind of drifting downwards, real slow. My buddy's freaking out now, saying we should go inside, call the cops, something. But I'm just rooted to the spot. I can't take my eyes off these lights. They're getting closer and closer, and now I can make out that shape again, that huge circular disc. But it's coming down much slower this time. It descends right into his backyard, I kid you not, maybe about 30 feet up. It's massive, honestly felt like the size of his house. And it's just hovering there, silent except for that humming sound. The whole underside of the thing is lit up with these lights. We're both standing there in shock. And then, this is gonna sound crazy, but a section of the bottom of the UFO, like a panel or something, starts to open. This bright light spills out from it, and we can see something moving inside. At this point, my friend is pulling on my arm, whispering, "We need to get out of here now." But I'm stuck. I can't move. I'm just staring at this opening in the UFO. Then, something starts to descend from the light. It's hard to make out at first, but as it gets closer, I can see it's a figure, humanoid, but not human. It's taller, with long limbs, and it's just floating down towards us, slow and steady. The figure lands in the backyard, and I can see it more clearly now. It's got this smooth, silvery skin and large, dark eyes that seem to reflect the night. It's just standing there looking at us, and I'm looking back, frozen. My friend's practically dragging me at this point, trying to get me to move, but I can't. I'm locked in this connection with this creature. It's like it's looking right into me. Then, just as quickly as it all started, the creature turns around, floats back up into the UFO, and the panel closes. The humming gets louder for a second, and then the UFO just shoots up into the sky again, disappearing. Neither of us knew what to say. I mean, how do you even start to process something like that? We must have stood there for what felt like hours, just going over it again and again. Did that really just happen? What was that thing? Should we tell someone? My mind was racing with a million questions. Finally, we managed to get ourselves inside. We were both shaken and honestly very scared. We sat in his living room, just trying to calm down. My friend was all for calling the police or the news or something. But we had no proof, just this unbelievable story. And part of me was worried about what might happen if we did tell someone. Like, would those things come back? Were we in some kind of danger now? I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those lights, that creature. I kept going over every detail in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. It felt like a dream, but I knew it wasn't. In the days that followed, I became kind of obsessed with it. I started reading everything I could find about UFO sightings and alien encounters. I wanted to know if anyone else had experienced anything like we had, if there was any explanation for what we had seen. But no matter how much I searched, I couldn't find anything that matched our experience exactly. There were stories, sure, but none of them felt as real, as tangible as what we had experienced. I kept going back to that backyard at night, looking up at the sky, half expecting, half hoping to see those lights again, but they never came back. It was just a normal sky, normal stars. It felt like a missed connection, like something had reached out to us, and now it was gone. And that's where I'm at now. I still don't have any answers, and I'm not sure I ever will. It's something I think about a lot that night. Those lights, that creature. It's a part of me now, this unsolvable mystery. Okay, so I'll tell you about this crazy thing that happened to us. My girlfriend Emma and I were headed to Myrtle Beach from our home in Kentucky for a little vacation. We decided to drive through this scenic route in the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina. It's a beautiful place, but also kind of isolated and wild. We were just cruising along, talking about all the stuff we'd do at the beach, when Emma pointed out how foggy it was getting. It was weird because it was a clear day just minutes before. I slowed down the car, not wanting to hit any deer that might jump out or something. That's when we heard it. It was this low, rumbling growl, but it was so loud, it felt like it was coming from everywhere, like a thunderstorm brewing. Emma grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, trying to look calm. But man, my heart was racing like a thoroughbred. We were both worried that it might be some weird mountain weather system or something that happens in these parts, so I locked the doors to keep us inside, but kept driving really slowly. The fog was getting thicker, and it was getting hard to see. That's when we saw what I think was the source of the noise, standing right there in the middle of the road. It was tall, like really tall, and it had these antlers or something on its head. Its skin looked gray and tight, like it was stretched over its bones. Emma gasped. "What is that?" I had no idea. It looked human, but not. It was just standing there staring at us with these glowing eyes. I've heard stories about the Wendigo, the creature from Native American folklore. They say it's a creature that's born from cannibalism, a human who's consumed by greed and hunger. But I always thought that was just a story. This thing, whatever it was, started moving towards the car. Its movements were jerky, unnatural. Emma started screaming, telling me to drive, but I couldn't. My body wasn't responding, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Then, the creature let out this ear-piercing scream. It sounded like a person and an animal at the same time. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would burst out of my chest. Emma was still screaming, "Drive, drive!" I swear, I've never pushed the gas pedal that hard before. As we tore down the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The creature, or the Wendigo, or whatever the hell it was, started chasing us. It was fast, freakishly fast. Its long, bony limbs moved in a way that just didn't seem human. I couldn't believe it, but it was actually keeping up with the car. Emma was crying now, her hands covering her face. "What is it? What does it want?" she kept asking. I had no answers. I just knew we had to get away from it. The road was winding and narrow, and with the fog, I could barely see a few feet ahead. Every turn felt like a gamble. Then, Something even crazier happened. The creature let out another scream and leapt. It actually jumped onto the back of the car. The whole car shook, and I could hear the metal creaking under its weight. Emma was screaming at the top of her lungs. I was trying to keep the car on the road, but it was hard with that thing shifting its weight behind us. I could see its face in the rearview mirror, those glowing eyes and that mouth full of sharp teeth. It was like looking at death itself. In a panic, I remembered the flare gun my dad had put in the glove compartment. He always said it was just in case of emergencies, but I never thought I'd use it like this. I told Emma to grab it. She was shaking, but she did it. She rolled down the window, aimed the flare gun at the creature, and fired. The flare hit it square in the chest. There was this horrible, otherworldly howl, and it fell off the car. The howl was a sort of twisted scream that seemed to pull at your soul. Emma and I were both panting, our breath fogging up the car from the inside, making it even harder to see. I kept the pedal to the metal, my hands so tight on the wheel I thought it might snap. Emma kept turning around, looking out the back window, but the fog had swallowed everything up. We couldn't see the creature anymore, but that didn't make us feel any safer. "We have to call the cops," Emma said, her voice quivering. But I wasn't sure. What would we tell them? That we were attacked by a myth? By a ghost story? They'd think we were crazy or that we were on something. And besides, I didn't want to stop, not even for a second, not with the possibility that that thing might be right behind us. We drove in silence until we finally saw the lights of the beach houses. The fog seemed to recede as we got closer to civilization, but maybe that was just my imagination. When we finally stopped at the beach, it was mid-morning. Other vacation goers were out, setting up for the day, completely oblivious to the horror we'd just lived through. Emma and I looked at each other, both of us knowing that we had experienced something that would change us forever. We had planned to stay at the beach for a week, but suddenly, all those plans felt meaningless. We didn't talk much about it after that. It was like if we didn't talk about it, maybe it wouldn't be real. But every so often, I'd catch Emma staring out into the area that bordered the beach, and I knew she was thinking about it. And sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up from a dream where I'd hear that howl, and I'd wonder if it was really just a dream. After a few days, we couldn't deal anymore. We packed up our stuff and left the beach without even touching the water. We drove back home, taking a different route, one that was more populated, more normal. We've never been back to Pisgah National Forest, and we never plan to try to go there ever again. So there I was with my wife, Ellie, in Cordova, Alaska, for this heli-skiing adventure we'd been planning forever. Cordova, man, it's this tiny, out-of-the-way place, but it's unreal. It's like being on another planet with all those mountains and snow. The first couple of days were insane in the best way possible. We're talking pristine slopes, fresh powder, and just us and the mountain. Ellie and I, we live for this stuff. She's got this fearless streak, you know, always pushing the limits. But things took a turn on day 3. We're farther out than we've ever been. The pilot drops us off on this ridge, and it's like we're the only people in the world. We gear up, ready to conquer these slopes. The snow's perfect, untouched. We're tearing down the mountain, whooping and yelling, feeling alive. Then Ellie stops suddenly. I mean, dead in her tracks. I pull up next to her, wondering what's up. She's staring at the ground, and I see it too. These tracks. They're huge, man, like nothing we've ever seen. Not bear, not deer, something else. They're deep and fresh, cutting through the snow like a hot knife through butter. We're trying to figure it out when suddenly, this sound rips through the silence. It's this low, guttural growl, echoing off the mountains. My heart's racing, and I can see Ellie's eyes are wide with fear. We've heard wildlife before, but this is different. It's deeper, more menacing. We're standing there frozen, not sure what to do. That's when we see it. This creature, it's like nothing I've ever seen before. Something straight out of a cryptid story. It's massive, easily twice the size of a bear, but it's not a bear. Its fur is this matted, dark gray color, almost blending with the shadows of the trees. It's got these piercing yellow eyes that seem to look right through us. Ellie grabs my arm, and we're both just staring at this thing. It's sniffing the air, its nostrils flaring. It hasn't seen us yet, or if it has, it's not interested yet. We're backing away slowly, trying not to make a sound. But the snow, it's crunching under our boots. That's when it turns its head towards us. The way it moves is eerie, almost like it's not used to walking on four legs. Its eyes lock onto ours, and for a second, I swear, time just stops. We're backing up faster now, trying to put distance between us and this creature. It lets out another growl, louder this time, and it starts moving towards us. Not fast, but deliberate, like it's curious. Not aggressive, yet. But who knows what it's thinking? Ellie's whispering, telling me we need to get out of there, and I'm nodding, trying to think. The slope's steep here, and if we ski down fast, maybe we can outrun it. But what if we fall? What if it chases us? Just then, the creature stops. It's standing there watching us, and I swear, it's almost like it's thinking, deciding what to do with us. The tension is unbearable. I'm holding my breath, waiting for it to charge. But it doesn't. It just turns and walks back into the trees, disappearing as quickly as it appeared. Ellie and I don't wait around. We ski down that mountain faster than we ever have before, not stopping until we reach the spot where the helicopter is supposed to pick us up. We're safe, but we're shaken. Neither of us can believe what we just saw. Was it a bear, some undiscovered species, or something else? We don't know, and I'm not sure we want to. That night, back in Cordova, we're trying to make sense of it all. But how can you make sense of something like that? It's beyond anything we've ever experienced. Ellie and I are in our room, and we can't stop talking about it. We're going over every detail, trying to figure out if what we saw was real or not. But we both saw it, clear as day. We agreed that the creature was real. The next morning, we decide to do some digging. We head into town, thinking maybe the locals have seen something like it before. Cordova's small, and it doesn't take long to strike up conversations. We hit the local diner, and I start chatting with the guy behind the counter. I'm trying to be casual, not sound like some crazy tourist. I mention we saw something strange while skiing, and I describe the creature without making it sound too unbelievable. The guy, he pauses, gives me this look like he's weighing whether to tell me something. Then he leans in and says that we're not the first to see something like that. He tells us about legends, stories passed down about creatures in the mountains, things that aren't supposed to exist. He's vague, but the way he talks, I can tell he believes it. We thank him and head out, feeling even more curious. Throughout the day, we talk to more people. Some brush us off, but others, they have stories. Old tales of creatures in the wilderness. Things that the native cultures have talked about for centuries. It's all hearsay and legends, but it's fascinating. We're piecing together these stories, trying to find some common thread. It's like we've stumbled upon a mystery, something hidden in the Alaskan wilderness. That night, back at our hotel, Ellie and I make a decision. We have to go back out there. We need to see if we can find this creature again, or at least find some evidence of its existence. The next day, we gear up again. We're not just skiing this time, we're on a mission. We convince the pilot to take us back to the same place where we saw the creature. He's reluctant and pushes us to see a different slope. He doesn't know why we want to go back there, but we insist. We need to know. We land on the same ridge, the air crisp and clear. We start our descent, eyes peeled for any sign of the creature or its tracks. Halfway down, near where we saw it before, we find something. It's a cave, partially hidden by trees and snow. We wouldn't have seen it if we hadn't been looking. We approach cautiously, not sure what we'll find. Inside, it's dark and smells of wet earth and something else. Something wild. There are bones scattered around, and the ground is packed down, like something big has been spending a lot of time here. This has to be its den. This is proof enough to us, tangible proof that we weren't just seeing things. But there's no sign of the creature now, which is scary, thinking it will show up at any time. We wait around for a while, hoping to catch a glimpse of it. but it's like the mountain is empty. Eventually, the pilot radios us to make sure we're okay and saying we need to head back. Reluctantly, we leave, making our way back to the pickup point. On the flight back to Cordova, Ellie and I are quiet, lost in our thoughts. We came looking for answers, but all we have are more questions. What is this creature? Why has no one studied it? And most importantly, why does it seem like it's hiding? We land back in Cordova with the sun setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. We've got our proof for our story, but somehow it doesn't feel like enough. This isn't the end of it, not for us. We've touched something wild and mysterious, and it's left its mark on us. Hi, so I've got this insane story to share, and it didn't happen too long ago, so I'm still really thinking about it all. I'm a marine biologist, and I've been working in the Gulf of Mexico, focusing on deep-sea ecosystems. It's usually routine stuff, but this one time a few weeks ago, it was anything but routine. So, at first, it's a typical day, and I'm on this research vessel, about 200 miles off the coast of Texas. We're doing deep-sea dives in a submersible, which is always cool but kinda intense. There's this weird sense of isolation when you're down there, surrounded by nothing but deep blue. Anyway, my colleague and I are down there, checking out some unusual thermal readings near the seabed. The Gulf's got all sorts of quirky underwater features, but this one's got us scratching our heads. It's like this massive, unexplained heat source, and we're thinking maybe it's a new hydrothermal vent or something. So I'm in the submersible with my colleague Jenna. We're the only female team, but she's the pro at this stuff. She's been diving longer than I've been in the field. We're joking around, trying to ease the tension of being in a tin can hundreds of feet under, and that's when it happens. Out of nowhere, we see this thing. And I'm not talking about a shark or a whale or any creature I've seen before. This thing is massive, easily the size of our sub, but it's not moving like any sea creature I know. It's got these long, undulating tentacles, and it's gliding through the water like it's part of it. Jenna goes dead silent, and I can hear my own heart thumping in my ears. We're trained for all sorts of scenarios, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares you for a face-to-face with a genuine sea monster. This creature, it's got a head, or I guess what you'd call a head, that's as big as the front end of our sub. It's got these deep, dark eyes, and it's looking right at us. I don't know if it's curiosity or something else, but it's like it's studying us, trying to figure out what we are. And then, it does something that still gives me chills. It lets out this sound, not really a roar, but more like a low, rumbling groan. It vibrates through the sub, and I swear I could feel it in my bones. At this point, Jenna and I are freaking out. We're trying to stay calm, but come on. We're in a tiny sub with a creature that looks like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie. We start backing up, trying to put some distance between us and it, but it's like the creature's mirroring our movements. It's not attacking, but it's not letting us go either. The weirdest part, it's got these markings on its skin, almost like glowing patterns. They're shifting and changing, and I can't help but think it's trying to communicate or something. I know it sounds crazy, but down there in the dark, anything feels possible. So, there we are, in a standoff with this sea monster, and I'm thinking, this is it. This is how I go. Jenna's gripping the controls like her life depends on it, which, let's face it, it probably does. We're both staring at this thing, and it's like time standing still. Then, all of a sudden, it moves closer. My heart's pounding so loud I'm sure anyone nearby could hear it. But here's the wild part. As it gets closer, the creature starts to change. The colors on its skin shift, turning from this dark, eerie blue to a brighter, almost luminescent hue. It's like watching one of those deep-sea documentaries where the fish light up in the darkest parts of the ocean. Only this is real, and it's happening right in front of me. The creature's tentacles, they're almost hypnotic, undulating in the water. And then, one of them reaches out towards the sub. Jenna's about to freak out, but I put my hand on hers to stop her from making any sudden moves. We're both holding our breath, watching this tentacle coming closer and closer. And then it just stops. The tip of the tentacle is inches away from the sub's glass. It's this surreal moment, and I'm half expecting the glass to crack under the pressure or something. But nothing like that happens. Instead, the creature just stays there, its tentacle hovering. It's then that I notice something even more bizarre. The end of the tentacle, it's almost like it's trying to mimic the shape of a human hand. I know, it sounds insane, but that's exactly what it looked like. 5 appendages, like fingers, spreading out and pressing gently against the glass. Jenna and I exchanged this look like, "Are you seeing this too?" It's like the creature's trying to communicate or connect with us in some way. And for a moment, I forget to be scared because I'm just so in awe of this moment. The creature keeps its tentacle there for what feels like an eternity. Then, as if deciding we're not a threat, or maybe just losing interest, it slowly pulls back. The colors on its skin start to dim again, shifting back to that deep, dark blue. Just when I think it's going to leave, it does one more thing that blows my mind. It emits this series of low-pitched sounds, almost like a song, and it sounds super complex, more, intentional. And then, just like that, it's over. The creature turns and disappears into the depths, leaving Jenna and me in a stunned silence. We're just floating there in the sub, trying to digest what just happened. The rest of the dive is uneventful, if you can call anything uneventful after an encounter like that. When we surface, we're bombarded with questions from the crew as to what we saw down there. We try to explain, but words don't really do it justice. I can't stop thinking about it, you know? What was that creature? Why did it approach us? What was it trying to say? These questions keep running through my head. It's not just about scientific curiosity anymore. It's more personal. I feel like I've experienced something profound, something that's changed the way I look at the ocean and its mysteries. I'm a park ranger at Joshua Tree National Park in California. I never thought I'd be typing this type of report, but here I am, doing just that. It all started with some bizarre reports. Visitors mentioned strange noises at night that didn't match up with the wildlife we know here. Then came the sightings. People talked about a creature, tall and canine-like, but walking on 2 legs. I took these reports and at first didn't give them much thought. But as they continued to trickle in, I started to become attuned to a potential problem. One evening, after about 5 or 6 similar reports came in, I decided to investigate these claims myself. I headed to where the most recent sighting had supposedly occurred, a remote area on the west side of the park. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the Joshua trees and the rocks. I was investigating an area near some rock formations when I heard it. A low growl, not like any coyote or bobcat. It was definitely unique. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it towards the sound. That's when I almost lost it. There was a creature standing about 30 feet away. It stood upright, easily over 6 feet tall, covered in dark fur. Its eyes reflected the light from my flashlight, glowing an eerie yellow. But the most unsettling part was its face. It was canine, yes, but there was a look in its eyes that you don't see in wild animals. We stared at each other, and I tried not to move or flinch, but I knew that at the same time I needed help. I slowly reached for my radio to call this in, but the creature turned and bolted with incredible speed. It moved effortlessly, disappearing into the desert night. I still called it in on the radio, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Mike. I've got something unusual out here." "Go ahead, Mike," the dispatcher's voice crackled through. I just saw something. It's hard to describe. Over 6 feet, standing upright. Looked like a dog, but not a dog. I paused, struggling to find the right words. There was a brief silence before the dispatcher replied, "You all right, Mike?" I wasn't sure if dispatch was legitimately concerned or messing with me. "I'm fine," I said quickly, a bit too defensively. "It's just, never mind. I'll keep patrolling." I clipped the radio back onto my belt and continued my rounds, but my mind was elsewhere. What was that thing? I got through the rest of my rounds but barely remember what all I did. Then, after a few days of pondering the whole thing, I decided to set up a night patrol in the same area. I needed answers. I packed my gear, flashlight, camera, extra batteries, and a small flare just in case. As dusk fell, I found myself back at the spot where I had seen it. Hours passed. The desert night was alive with sounds, but none of them were what I was waiting for. Just as I was about to give up and pack up, I heard it again. That low growl, closer this time. My pulse quickened. I turned slowly, flashlight in hand, and there it was. Closer than before, its yellow eyes staring into mine. But it didn't run away. It walked, almost casually, disappearing behind a large Joshua tree. The casual way it just walked away without being nervous gave me a real sense of its power. Again, I finished my patrol, but barely remember. The next day, I showed up for my shift with a plan forming in my mind. I couldn't just sit on this. I needed to do something, but in a way that wouldn't make me the laughingstock of the entire park service. I decided to reach out to an old buddy from college who went into wildlife biology. Maybe he could shed some light on this without thinking I'd lost my marbles. We met up at a local diner, the kind of place where nobody would pay attention to a couple of guys hunched over a table. I leaned in across the table to him and gave him the lowdown on what happened. Then I asked, "Ever heard of anything like this before?" He studied me for a long time, then looked up, his expression serious. "Where did you say you saw this?" "At work, in Joshua Tree. Why?" "What is it?" I asked. He leaned in closer. "I'm not sure, but I've heard stories. You're not the first one to see something like this." We talked for hours, and he told me about similar sightings across North America. None of them had any real proof, just stories and blurry images. I went back to the park with a new sense of purpose. But then, one night, it happened a third time. I was in a remote part of the park, the same area where I first saw it. I turned and saw it standing there, just outside the reach of my flashlight. We locked eyes, and something passed between us. An understanding, maybe. It was a wild creature, yes, but there was a strange sense of understanding on its face. It didn't stay long. It turned and walked off, leaving me alone, standing there. That was the last time I saw it. I don't know what it was or why it showed itself to me, but I know it's out there somewhere. Since then, I've heard other rangers talking about strange sightings and sounds. I don't think they know what I know. At least they don't give details about actual encounters. But it's enough to make me believe that this is a real living being out there. I still work at Joshua Tree, and every time I'm out there, I can't help but look for it. The creature of Joshua Tree. It's a part of this place now, a part of its mystery as far as I'm concerned. So there I was, driving down Route 19 in West Virginia. This part of the state is pretty rural. Long stretches of road, trees as far as the eye can see, and hardly any traffic once you get past the main towns. It was getting late, and the sky was turning that deep shade of blue that's almost black. I had been driving for hours, heading south from Pittsburgh, trying to make it to my cousin's place in Beckley. The whole drive I kept thinking about how our Uncle Joe used to tell us stories about the Mothman and all kinds of other creepy creatures. But the Mothman always got me the most. It's this weird creature with giant wings and red eyes that people in Point Pleasant kept seeing back in the 60s. It was just after I passed the sign for the New River Gorge Bridge when I noticed something seemed out of place. A movement that seemed unusual. My headlights caught a glimpse of something big near the tree line. At first, I thought it was a bear or a large deer. You know how animals sometimes wander onto the road in areas like this without fences or guardrails. But as I got closer, this thing, it didn't look normal at all. It stood taller than a man, at least 7 feet, I'd say. Its eyes reflected the light from my headlights, glowing a bright, unnatural red. I slowed down to about 15 miles an hour, squinting to get a better look, and that's when it unfolded these massive wings. I'm not kidding. They must have been at least 10 feet across. I stopped the car, right there in the middle of the road, and just stared. I didn't even think about my actions. My body just did it. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This thing, this Mothman that had always terrified me, was right there, and it just stared back at me, those red eyes boring into mine. We stayed like that a while, just looking at each other and trying to figure out each other's next move. Then, without warning, it let out this screech. It was this high-pitched, ear-piercing sound that made me wince. The sound seemed to vibrate through the air, rattling the windows of my car. It felt like it wasn't just a sound, but something physical, you know? Something that could touch you, shake you. For a moment, I thought about driving away as fast as I could, but my body was literally malfunctioning. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The creature, this Mothman, cocked its head slightly, as if curious or maybe confused by my presence. Then it took a step towards the car. Just one step, but it was enough to make my heart leap into my throat. The creature's eyes weren't just glowing. They seemed to be burning, like coals in a dark room. I could see now that its body was covered in what looked like a mix of feathers and fur, dark and matted. It was hard to tell in the dim light, but it seemed almost, I don't know, human in a way. Maybe in the way it seemed like it could think, but really twisted, wrong somehow. It raised one of its wings slightly, and I saw that the wings were more like those of a bat than a bird, leathery and veined. And then, as if it knew I was studying it, the creature stretched out its wings fully. The span was incredible, easily wider than the road. It was a display of power, and it seemed purposeful. I have to say that I felt utterly insignificant in front of it. I don't know what came over me, but I found myself slowly reaching for my phone. I wanted to take a picture, to have proof of what I was seeing. But the moment I moved, the creature's head snapped towards me, its eyes narrowing. Somehow it knew what I was thinking. Then, it took a powerful leap and soared into the sky. The force of its takeoff sent a gust of wind that rocked my car. I watched, mouth open, as it disappeared into the night sky, becoming just a shadow against the stars. I hated to think it, but it really felt like I had manifested this thing. Eventually, I turned the car back on and continued driving, but my hands were still shaking on the wheel. Every shadow in the trees seemed like it could be hiding another one of those creatures, because when you see one, there's got to be more, right? When I finally reached Beckley, I was a mess. My cousin saw my face and knew something was wrong. I tried to tell him, to explain what I had seen, but the words just wouldn't come out right. I was jumbled and couldn't tell the story in a logical order. It sounded crazy, even to me as it came out of my mouth. He suggested maybe I had dozed off at the wheel and dreamed it all. But I know that's not what happened. That thing was real as anything I've ever experienced. I can't even begin to tell you how hard it was to drive back home after my visit. I was literally on the phone with my cousin the entire time I drove along that stretch. Even after entering Pennsylvania, I didn't feel safe. Also, I can't look at the night sky the same way anymore. Every time I drive past a stretch of woods, my eyes search the tree line, half in fear, half in wonder that I might see something again. It's like a trigger when I'm driving. The bottom line is that I know it's out there somewhere, and I can't help but feel like our paths will cross again. Sometimes I even wonder if it's watching for me. Hey, so I got to tell you about this wild thing that happened to me the other day. I was out in Arizona, the place with all the cacti and sun, looking at this old abandoned house with lots of land around it. I've been thinking about buying a fixer-upper, something to work on and retire in surrounded by a beautiful landscape. This place was out in the middle of nowhere, pretty much, a couple of miles out of Prescott. So I get there, and right off the bat, the place is giving off some serious creepy vibes. It's this big 2-story deal, windows all boarded up, paint peeling off everywhere. Looked like something straight out of a horror movie. The real estate agent was supposed to meet me there, but guess what? She was a no-show. I called her and she's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, something came up, but feel free to look around." Just great, right? I decided to go ahead and take a look anyway. I'd driven all the way out there, so why not? The front door was all jammed up, so I had to enter through this broken window around the back. Inside, it was just as spooky as you'd expect. Dust and cobwebs everywhere. That old house smell too. But the bones were good. And so I'm wandering through the rooms, trying to imagine what the place could look like all fixed up, when I heard something upstairs. At first, I thought maybe the real estate agent had shown up after all. Or maybe some animal got in there. But no, this was different. It sounded like, I don't know, like a scraping sound, followed by this weird, wet noise, like someone dragging a sack of meat or something. Totally gross, I know. So, what do? Instead of running out of there like any sane person, I decide to check it out. I'm telling you, curiosity is going to be the end of me one day. I head upstairs, and that's when things get really weird. The sound was coming from the end of the hallway, where there's this old closed door. I'm standing there just outside the door, trying to work up the nerve to open it. I'm not usually scared of stuff, but man, my heart was pounding. I finally pushed the door open, and what I saw in there, I still can't believe it. The room was bare except for this thing crouched in the corner. It was, I don't even know how to describe it. It was pale, like super pale, and it had these long, thin arms and legs, like way longer than any person's should be. And its eyes, they were this shiny black, just staring right at me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, nothing. I just stood there frozen, staring at this thing, this crawler or whatever you want to call it. It made this hissing sound, like air escaping a tire, and started moving towards me, all jerky and weird, like it's not used to moving around or something. Its movements are unnatural, almost like stop-motion animation. Creepy, right? As it's getting closer, I notice more details about it, stuff that's burned into my brain now. Its skin looks rough, kind of like dried-out leather, but paler, almost sickly white. And it's thin, like really thin, as if it hadn't eaten in ages. Its fingers, man, they were long and ended in these sharp, dirty nails or claws or whatever. I remember thinking it looked starved and wild, like something that's been hiding away from the world for way too long. The way it looked at me, those black eyes, it's like it was curious but also hungry? I don't know how else to describe it. Its head was kind of cocked to the side, like it was trying to figure me out, deciding what to do with me. I got this wave of dread, like I knew I shouldn't be there, like this was something I was never meant to see. The room was dead silent, except for that hissing and the sound of my own breathing, which was way too loud in my ears. I remember my heart was pounding so hard, I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I kept thinking, this is it, I'm done for. I've seen too much. Just when I thought it was going to lunge at me, there was this loud crash from downstairs, like something heavy had fallen over. It startled the creature, and it whipped its head around towards the door. That was my chance. I didn't think, I just ran. I turned and bolted out of the room, down the hallway. I could hear it behind me, that weird, dragging, scraping sound it made as it moved. I hit the stairs, taking them two at a time, praying I wouldn't trip. I could still hear it behind me, but it sounded further away. Maybe it wasn't used to chasing things, or maybe it was just toying with me. I don't know. I wasn't about to stop and find out. I made it to the ground floor and sprinted towards the broken window I'd come in through. I remember thinking, just a few more seconds, don't let it catch you. I could see the sunlight outside, and it felt like a lifeline. I dove through that window, not caring about the glass or how I landed. I hit the ground hard, rolled, and got up running. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, glancing back at the house, half expecting to see that thing coming after me. But there was nothing. I got in, locked the doors, and drove out of there like a mad woman. I stopped at this little diner on the outskirts of Prescott, trying to calm down. I must have looked a mess because the waitress kept giving me these concerned glances. I ordered a coffee, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the cup. I kept replaying the encounter over and over in my head, trying to figure out if there was some logical explanation. While I'm sitting there, I overhear these two old-timers at the next table talking about the local area. Normally, I just tune out that kind of stuff, but given what had just happened, I was all ears. They mentioned something about an old abandoned house being cursed, and how people have seen strange things around there. My heart nearly stopped. It had to be the same place. I finished my coffee, paid, and walked over to their table. I tried to sound casual, asked them about the house. They looked at each other. Then one of them, this grizzled old guy with a white beard, tells me that the place has a bad history. He said that back in the day, it was owned by a recluse who was barely ever seen. Rumors went around that he was into some weird stuff. After he died, the house was left to rot, and that's when the sightings began. People reported seeing strange creatures, hearing weird noises, stuff like that. Most folks just avoid the place now. The other guy, a bit younger but still old, nodded along, adding that his cousin once saw a pale, long-limbed figure near the house years ago. He said it scared his cousin so bad, the guy hasn't been right since. Hearing this, I felt a mix of fear and validation. I wasn't crazy. Others had seen it too. But it also meant that what I saw was real, and that was a terrifying thought. I thanked them for the info and left. I knew I should just head home, forget about the house. But I couldn't. I needed answers. I decided to do some research on the house and its previous owner. I spent the next few days digging through old newspaper archives and online forums. Turns out the old recluse was a total eccentric, a loner. There were no records of any family. After his death, the house just sat there, decaying, becoming the subject of local ghost stories. So, that's where I'm at now. I'm torn between wanting to forget the whole thing and this deep, nagging need to find out the truth. What do you think? Should I go back there or not? So, I've got this story. It's about this one time I was mountain biking in Northern California. You know, those remote forests where you hardly see another soul. Yeah, those ones. So I'm out there on these trails that look like they've barely seen any action, and I'm just enjoying the ride. Now, you've probably heard about those local legends, those stories about giant birds they call thunderbirds. They're supposed to have these massive wingspans, like something out of a movie. So there I am, pedaling away. The only sound is my bike crunching over twigs and leaves. It's peaceful, but kind of eerie too, because it's so quiet. You know how it is when you're out in the wild. It's like the world's got this hushed sort of feeling. And that day, the forest felt even more silent than usual. I stopped for a second, just to catch my breath, have some water. That's when I see this shadow, this huge moving shadow, gliding over the ground. It's so big, it's like a cloud passed overhead, except there's not a cloud in the sky. I look up, and I kid you not, I see this enormous bird soaring above the treetops. My first thought, that's no bird, it's got to be a plane or a drone or something. But it's moving so smoothly, so gracefully. It doesn't have the mechanical jerkiness of a drone, and it's way too low and quiet to be a plane. This bird has got this massive wingspan, I'm talking huge, like it could easily wrap around a small car. And the way it moves, it's almost surreal, like it's part of the sky itself. I'm standing there, my bike forgotten, just staring at this thing. It's got this powerful, majestic look to it, with its wings outstretched. The sunlight's hitting it just right, making its feathers gleam with this sort of iridescent sheen. It's like watching a piece of ancient myth come to life right in front of my eyes. For a moment, it feels like the bird notices me. It's hard to explain, but I swear it tilts its head slightly, as if it's curious. My heart's pounding like crazy, and I'm not sure whether to be scared or awestruck. I mean, how often do you see something straight out of a legend just cruising above you? So, I'm caught in this weird mix of fear and awe. I mean, seeing something like this, something that's supposed to be just a story, it's nuts. You don't expect to encounter a legend on a casual bike ride. So, there I am, staring up at this massive bird, feeling like I've stumbled into another world. The thing's just floating there in the sky, so effortless. It's got these eyes. They're sharp and piercing, like they're looking right through you. And its feathers, they're not just black or brown, but like a mix of colors that keep changing with the light. It's mesmerizing. Then, the bird does something that totally blows my mind. It starts circling, lower and lower, like it's curious about me. I'm frozen, can't move a muscle. Part of me wants to run, the whole fight or flight thing. But another part of me can't look away. It's like I'm locked in this moment with this incredible creature. As it circles, the wind from its wings is like a mini storm. Leaves and small branches are getting tossed around, and I can feel the gusts hitting my face. It's powerful. You can really sense the strength of this creature. I remember thinking, what if it decides I'm a threat? Or worse, what if it sees me as lunch? But even with those thoughts, I'm still just standing there, completely awestruck. It's like every part of my being is focused on this bird. Then it lets out this sound, this deep rumbling call. It's not harsh or screeching like an eagle. It's more like rolling thunder, deep and resonant. It echoes through the forest, and I swear, it's like the ground vibrates with it. That sound, it's something primal. Now here's where it gets even crazier. As it's circling, it starts getting closer to the ground, closer to me. I'm thinking this is it. But just as I brace myself for whatever's going to happen, it does something unexpected. It stops circling and just hovers there, mid-air, its massive wings beating slowly. We're looking at each other, and I feel this sense of, connection? It sounds crazy, but it's like we're communicating without words. Like it's just as curious about me as I am about it. After what feels like an eternity, but was probably just a few seconds, it gives another one of those deep calls, and then, with a powerful beat of its wings, it shoots back up into the sky. I watch it go, feeling this mix of relief and disappointment. It's like I've just been part of something incredible, and now it's over. I stand there for I don't know how long, just trying to wrap my head around what happened. The forest is silent again, but it's a different kind of silence now. It's like everything's returned to normal, but I haven't. Eventually, I pick up my bike and start heading back. My mind's racing the whole time. Did that really just happen? Did I really see a thunderbird, or was it some kind of hallucination? But here's the thing. As I'm riding back, I start noticing small things. Twigs and leaves scattered on the path, more than usual. And there's this feeling in the air, like something big just passed through. By the time I get back to civilization, I've convinced myself it was real. I mean, how could it not be? Everything was too vivid, too intense to be just my imagination. So I get back to where I'm staying, and I can't keep this to myself. I start telling people about it, the locals, other bikers I run into, anyone who'll listen. Most of them look at me like I've lost my mind, but a few, especially the older locals, they don't seem so surprised. One old guy, he must have been in his 70s. He tells me I'm lucky. Says that seeing a thunderbird is a sign, a good omen. He talks about the legends, how these birds are powerful spirits of the forest, guardians of the natural world. I'm not much for superstitions, but after what I saw, I'm starting to believe there's more to this world than meets the eye. But here's where it gets really interesting. The next day, I decide to go back to the same trail. Part of me is hoping to see the thunderbird again, but mostly, I just want to make sense of what happened. I need to know if it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I'm riding along, keeping an eye on the sky, half expecting to see that giant shadow again. But there's nothing, just the usual birds, the sound of the wind in the trees. I'm starting to feel a bit foolish, like maybe I did imagine the whole thing. Then, as I'm about to head back, I spot something on the ground. It's a feather. It's got this mix of colors, shimmering in the light, just like the feathers of the bird I saw. I pick it up and it feels powerful, almost electric. It's like holding a piece of the sky in my hand. Now, I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but there's no way this is a normal feather. It's too big, too unique. It's gotta be from the thunderbird. I show the feather to the same people I told my story to. Some are skeptical, saying it could be from an eagle or some other large bird. But the old guy, the one who told me about the legends, his eyes light up when he sees it. He's so excited that I decide to give it to him. Seems like it belongs with him more than me. I spend a few more days in the area, exploring the trails, keeping an eye on the skies, but I don't see the thunderbird again. It's like it showed itself to me that one time, and then vanished back into legend. And that's my story, a bike ride that turned into an encounter with the extraordinary. It's something I'll never forget, a story I'll be telling for years to come. And who knows, maybe one day I'll see the Thunderbird again. But even if I don't, I'll always have the memories of the legend to keep with me. Congaree National Park in South Carolina has this quiet vibe, almost like something's always about to happen. I was a park ranger there for years, and something happened that I've kept to myself until now. As park rangers, we look after the land and the wildlife. There's a sense of peace that comes with it all, a certain simplicity that feels rewarding. But sometimes, things happen that completely break that peace. It was one night while patrolling the park. I love the park during the day, but night's a whole different story. It's usually super quiet, except for the leaves rustling or an owl hooting somewhere. The primary duties at night include ensuring the safety of late-night wanderers and managing the trails and boardwalks. As I made my way down the meandering wooden path, I heard an unusual racket from the boardwalk near the general campsite area. These noises were different from the usual night sounds in the park. It sounded like scraping or clattering, maybe something a person would make. I remember thinking it was maybe a lost backpacker, perhaps a camper having trouble with their gear. Picking up my pace, I radioed into the station, advising them of a possible situation at the campsite area. As I got closer to the sound, a pungent smell began to fill the air, a damp, musky odor that sent chills down my spine. It was a rotten smell and kind of strange. It was then that I spotted something hulking near the boardwalk. My flashlight caught this slick, shiny thing on it, like scales or something. It just froze when I got close, like it knew I was there. I remember standing there dumbfounded, staring at this giant form that was slumped over the railing of the walkway. The creature was leaning over, like it was looking at the marsh below. Its large black claws glistened in the moonlight. I was so scared, I couldn't even move. I was full of questions. What was it? Why was it here? Could it see me? Super scared, I backed away, trying to keep cool. It was then the creature let out a low growl, which echoed through the quiet night, a chilling yet animalistic sound. That growl, it still gets to me, even in my nightmares. Hearing that sound and seeing the huge figure, I realized my worst fears. I almost bumped into something that felt like it wasn't meant to be seen. When my light hit its eyes, I saw a weird glow, two bright yellow eyes staring at me. Its head looked like something from a dinosaur movie or a giant lizard. It was upright, standing possibly taller than any human I knew. My blood froze as I realized that it was this inhuman creature that made the sound. Scared stiff, I tried to radio the station but just fumbled with it. The static from the radio was so loud in the dead silence. As I slowly gathered my bearings, I managed to describe the bizarre situation. However, I got only static from the other end. There I was, alone in the night, with only the eerie moonlit silhouette of this strange behemoth some yards away. It had grown silent, almost unnervingly so, its scaled body barely moving. For a second, it felt like even the night stopped to look at it. Then, just as abruptly as it appeared, it retreated into the underbrush, the rustling foliage the only testament to its departure. I just stood there for what felt like forever, my heart pounding in my ears. I don't recall how I made my way back to the park office that night, acting on some primal instinct of self-preservation. Up until that night, I always thought the park was this peaceful place, away from all the chaos. I'd spent years learning our local ecosystems, even priding myself on my understanding of the most elusive animals within the park boundaries. So, what was this thing? It was like nothing I'd ever read about. That night changed something in me. I began patrolling with a constant anxiety, flinching at the rustles, the chill of the night seeming harsher. My flashlight beam seemed less powerful, but never again did I encounter that creature, nor did I find any evidence of it passing through. No claw marks, no crushed foliage, nothing but the memory of its large yellow eyes. Despite my growing fear, I couldn't ignore the fascination. I was left with a lot of questions. Was it intelligent? It certainly seemed to have that in its eyes. What did it eat? Where did it come from? Was it alone? I got kind of obsessed with finding out about other stories or sightings of big, reptile-like creatures. From many accounts and countless hours of research, I learned about the existence of creatures referred to as reptilians. Many might brush my account as another tall tale, yet another folklore for the campfires. Some days, I found myself questioning the authenticity of the encounter. Was it all just a sleep-deprived illusion? But whenever I started doubting, I'd remember those bright yellow eyes, and I just knew I couldn't have made that up. Now that I think about it, that scary night kind of made me more determined as a park ranger. There's something new and unknown in Congaree, and maybe one day I'll figure it out. Until then, those yellow eyes will continue to haunt my dreams. We made this trip every year, a family tradition. It was also around the time of the year when nature is in full bloom. Spring was turning to summer, and the temperature was as inviting as ever. A clear, bright sky crowned the Apostle Islands in Wisconsin as we, a group of 10, arrived at our family cabin. This cabin was our family's special getaway, a place where we broke free from the noise of everyday life and reconnected. Those trips to the cabin were some of my best childhood memories. I remember the s'mores, the campfire songs, and Grandpa's wild stories. They made the cabin feel magical. This particular year was no different. It was an 8-hour drive from our house in Milwaukee, but always worth it. As we rolled down the gravel road leading to our cabin, I envisioned the fun-filled times that lay ahead. Upon our arrival, the true beauty of this homestead always left us in awe. The cabin overlooked Lake Superior, and the Apostle Islands were tucked away in the distance. The site was a perfect muse for anyone seeking inspiration. As the day unfolded, we engaged ourselves in various outdoor activities. We felt Mother Nature's presence through a breathtaking hike, followed by a cookout, and later some fishing by the shoreline. I loved the cool breeze and the challenge of fishing. As the day ended, everyone slowly drifted off to their beds, leaving me as the sole night owl, which was customary. I always enjoyed the quieter parts of the day, especially when moonlight was the only light. I positioned my reclining chair to face the lake, planning to do some stargazing. The moon was full that night and reflected brilliantly on the otherwise dark lake. Everything was peaceful and quiet, just as I liked it. Little did I know, things were about to take a turn into the surprising and nerve-wracking. Suddenly, my gaze was drawn to a dark figure near the shoreline. I squinted, trying to make out the shape, assuming my eyes were playing tricks on me, or that it may have been one of my cousins taking a late-night stroll. But as I continued to focus, I realized this was not any of my family members. There was something peculiar about its outline that set a chill racing down my spine. What stood there was a creature, around 5 feet tall, silhouetted against the moonlit water. I blinked in disbelief, rubbed my eyes, but when I looked again, it was still there, unchanging. My heart pounded in my chest, sending a throbbing echo through the stillness. Its wings, folded against its body, were like a bat's but bigger, and seemed to be covered in black feathers. It had a human-like stature but seemed distorted, like a chilling caricature drawn out of a nightmare. Its face, the mere thought of it sends shivers down my spine even today. There was a blankness to it, no discernible features whatsoever, save for 2 gigantic, highly reflective red eyes. They seemed to glow against the moonlight, emotionless and piercing. It stood there, not moving, its eyes never leaving me. I was so scared, I couldn't move, my breathing uneven. Exactly how long was it there? I have no idea. But eventually the figure unfurled its massive wings and took off from the shoreline, disappearing into the night sky with an eerie grace. I let out a scared whimper, jumped up and ran back to the cabin. I remember being very grateful that day that our cabin had a sturdy lock. The following day I returned to the very spot I saw it, half hoping I would find evidence to prove I wasn't hallucinating. But there was none. With no physical proof of what I had allegedly witnessed, my encounter was met with skeptical smiles and gentle teasing from my family. It was only many years later, upon reading of an eerily similar account of a creature known as the Mothman, did I feel a strange relief wash over me. To this day, those glowing eyes still visit me in my dreams, serving as a chilling reminder of that encounter. On retrospect, despite the horror and shock, I can't help but feel a deep-seated fascination about that night. The fact that I may have encountered something so unusual, so otherworldly, it broadened the realness of all Grandpa's legendary tales. With every visit to that cabin, I find myself looking at that shoreline, and though a part of me wishes never to see that silhouette again, another part wonders, what if? Every calm night spent at the cabin now carries with it an undercurrent of thrill and anticipation of another encounter with the Mothman. Despite the scare, that memory made me think about things beyond the normal. What was initially a family retreat spot turned into a personal quest of unraveling the mysteries of the Mothman. I guess that night completely altered the way I looked at those retreats to the cabin. I guess what I'm trying to say is, there's more out there than what we see or believe. Encounters like these, rare and baffling, opens us up to that world. It reminds us of the innumerable mysteries that surround us, and in the process, introduces us to a reality that is at once convincing as it is thrilling. You won't believe what happened to me the other night. I still get chills thinking about it. So, I was up in Northern California, in Redwood National Park. You know, where the trees are so big, you feel like an ant walking among them. It was late, around midnight, and I was driving back to my campsite after a day of hiking and taking photos. The road through the park is narrow and winding, and there's barely any light except for what your headlights throw in front of you. I had the windows down a bit, enjoying that cool, earthy smell of the forest at night. Anyway, I'm driving along, listening to some low-key music, when suddenly, I see this bright light up ahead. Not like a flashlight or a car light, but brighter and kind of pulsating. At first, I thought maybe it was someone with one of those fancy drones, but it was way too big for that, and it was just hovering there right above the treetops. I slowed down, trying to get a better look, and that's when things got really weird. The light started moving, but not like anything I've ever seen. It was smooth and fast, darting between the trees like it was nothing. I stopped the car just in case, you know. Didn't want to end up smacking into a tree because I was staring at some weird light. So there I am, parked in the middle of this forest road, watching this light zip around. And then it stops, just like that. And it starts descending, slowly, right into a clearing not far from the road. I'm sitting there, heart pounding, not sure if I should drive away or go check it out. You know me, curiosity always wins. I grab my flashlight and my phone, and I start walking toward the clearing. The air felt different, kind of electric, and there was this low humming sound coming from the direction of the light. As I get closer, I see it's not just a light, I don't even know how to describe it. It was like a craft, but not like any aircraft we have. It was smooth, metallic, with lights running along its sides, and it was just hovering there, a few feet off the ground. And then, this is where it gets crazy. The craft, it opens up, like a part of it just slides away. And there's this figure standing there. It wasn't human, I can tell you that. Tall, way taller than any person, with this slender body and long limbs. Its skin was like this shimmery silver, and its eyes were large and black, like two pools of oil. It just stood there looking at me, and I swear I felt like it was looking right into me, you know? Not just at me, but into me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was just frozen there, staring at this alien, I guess you'd call it. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Obviously, this wasn't something you prepare for. You hear stories, see movies, but when you're standing there, face to face with something that's supposed to be science fiction, well, it's a whole different ballgame. The creature, this alien, didn't make any sudden moves. It just stood there observing me as much as I was observing it. The air around us was thick with this unspoken tension. You could almost feel the weight of this moment. Two beings from different worlds, just trying to figure each other out. After a few moments, it raised one of its long, slender arms, and I swear it was like it was reaching out to me. Not in a threatening way, but almost, I don't know, inquisitively. My heart was pounding out of my chest, but something inside me, call it stupidity or bravery, made me take a step forward. I was careful, slow, not wanting to spook it or anything. As I got closer, I noticed more details. Its skin wasn't just silver. It had this subtle glow, like moonlight reflected on water. And its eyes, they weren't just black. There were colors in there, shifting and changing, like looking into a galaxy. It's hard to explain, but it was mesmerizing. I stopped just a few feet away from it. We were close enough that I could have reached out and touched it, but I didn't dare. That's when I noticed something else, something that sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't speaking, but I was hearing something, like whispers, but inside my head. I know it sounds crazy, but it was like it was trying to communicate with me, telepathically or something. The whispers were jumbled at first, like tuning a radio, but then I started to make out words, or at least the essence of words. It was conveying feelings more than direct speech. Curiosity, confusion, and something like amazement. It was as if this creature was experiencing our world for the first time, through me. I don't know how long we stood there, exchanging these unspoken words. Time seemed to stand still in that clearing. But then, as suddenly as it all began, the moment was broken. A sound in the distance, maybe a car engine or an animal, startled me, and I blinked. When I looked back at the alien, the connection was gone. It slowly lowered its arm and turned back towards its craft. The craft's lights brightened, and that humming sound increased in intensity. I took a few steps back, instinctively knowing that it was about to leave. The alien paused at the entrance of the craft, looking back at me one last time. There was no expression I could read, but I felt this sense of, I don't know, farewell? Maybe gratitude? It's hard to put into words. Then, with a grace that defied its size, the craft lifted off the ground, the light around it pulsing. In a flash, it shot up into the night sky, leaving behind a trail of light that faded as quickly as it appeared. I stood there in the clearing, alone now, staring up at the sky where the craft had disappeared. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, awe, fear, excitement, disbelief. I mean, how do you even begin to process an encounter like that? The next day, after the encounter, I woke up at my campsite feeling different. It wasn't just the lack of sleep or the adrenaline hangover from what I'd seen. There was this feeling inside me, like something had changed. I can't explain it, but it was like I was more aware, more attuned to everything around me. I tried to go about my day like nothing happened. I did some more hiking, took photos, but my mind kept drifting back to the encounter. Every shadow in the trees, every rustle of leaves, made me think of the alien. I was half expecting, half hoping it would show up again, but it didn't. As night fell, I found myself drawn back to the clearing where I'd seen the craft. I don't know what I was expecting to find there. Maybe some clue that it wasn't just a dream. The clearing was empty, of course, just the moonlight and the shadows of the trees. I sat there for hours, just thinking, trying to make sense of it all. That's when I noticed something strange. My phone, which I'd been using to take notes and record my thoughts, was acting up. It was like it was picking up interference, but there was no signal out there. And then I started hearing those whispers again, like the night before. But this time they were clearer, more distinct. It was like the alien was still communicating with me, but from far away. The whispers were fragmented, but I could make out bits and pieces. Warnings about something coming, something about a convergence, and the need for understanding, for connection. I know how this sounds, man, like some sci-fi conspiracy theory, but I swear it was real. I felt it, heard it. It was like the encounter had opened up something in me, some channel of communication. The whispers faded eventually, and I was left there, alone with my thoughts. I didn't sleep that night, just lay there under the stars, thinking about what it all meant. The next morning, I packed up and headed home. I couldn't stay out there anymore, not with all these questions and no answers. The drive back was a blur, my mind elsewhere. I've been trying to make sense of it all ever since, researching UFO sightings, alien encounters, trying to find someone else who's experienced something like this. But nothing quite fits what I saw, what I felt. It's changed me, this encounter. I see the world differently now. I feel more connected to everything, more aware of the bigger picture. And those whispers, they come and go, always hinting at something more, something just beyond my understanding. So, there you have it, my encounter with the unknown. You can believe it or not, I don't blame you either way. It's a lot to take in, but it happened and it's changed me, for better or worse. It was the start of the shoulder season, late September, when the nights in Glacier National Park turned frosty and the tourists thin out. I'm the ranger who does the night patrol, something most of my buddies dread, but I actually like being alone out there. You might find it eerie, but there's something special about the park under the moonlight, all quiet and vast. All you can hear is the wild sounds of Montana, no cars or anything. That night, the moon was so bright it lit up the whole valley. The cliffs and trees looked like black and white pictures, and the stars were all blurry, making it feel kind of surreal. I was driving my patrol truck along the Going to the Sun road, a terrain that feels like an entirely different world after sundown. Sure, it can be dangerous, but that just goes with the territory. Part of my duty includes monitoring the wildlife, so spotting a coyote on the periphery or an owl hooting from the darkened woods was the norm. Sometimes I have to handle people who crowd the campgrounds or go for moonlit hikes without being ready for it. That night, though, everything felt oddly still, like the calm before the storm. After doing a full circle, I stopped around Bowman Lake, a corner of the park where campsites tend to be isolated, but attract some daredevil campers for the same reason. I turned off the engine and just sat there listening. All I could hear was the soft whisper of the wind, the distant crash of the waves, and an occasional rustling in the woods, probably a nocturnal critter going about its business. I was about to call into the station and report all clear, when something felt off. First, it was this weird smell, earthy and kind of rotten. My first thought was a dead animal. It is part and parcel of life in wilderness. But this smell, it made me really uneasy. A dense unease settled in my gut. Then came the sounds, a soft shuffling in the underbrush, like the quiet footstep of something not quite human. It was followed by a noise that really freaked me out. It was a laugh or maybe a cackle, quite unlike anything I've heard during my years patrolling these woods. It was creepy, like a cold laugh that cut through the night's silence. I grabbed my flashlight and my sidearm, looking into the pitch-black woods. But nothing appeared in the beam of my flashlight. The forest was dead silent. It was like time stopped for a second, and the silence was almost as loud as that weird laugh. Every instinct in my body screamed to leave this place, to seek out the comforting humdrum of the crowd. But I'm a ranger, and this is my job, so I had to check it out. I kept walking deeper into the woods, wondering what was behind that creepy laughter. And so, I ventured deeper into Glacier National Park, under the ghostly moonlight. With every step, I felt more like someone or something was watching me. Then I heard it, a voice I knew, calling my name. It was Jim, my partner ranger on the east side of the park. But something was off. His voice was weird, almost like a whisper, both far away and close at the same time. I sat still, straining my eyes into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice comes again, so eerily like Jim's, and this time it's from behind me, closer. I was scared, standing up and shining my flashlight around, looking for anything. Another call from the direction of the lake, where I was originally heading. I started freaking out, wondering how I could hear Jim's voice from two places at once. With shaking hands, I grasped my radio. and against every gut instinct telling me otherwise, begin my slow journey towards the voice coming from the lake. I couldn't make sense of anything. Every little sound, every leaf rustling or animal noise just made me more scared. As I was nearing the lake, my radio crackles to life and almost gives me a heart attack. It's Jim's voice, his real voice, clear and loud from the east side checkpoint, miles away. "All clear on this end," he reports. A knot tightened in my stomach as reality crashed down on me. If Jim is miles away, who or what is trying to lure me deeper into the woods? I was terrified and just ran back to my truck as fast as I could. I hopped in and slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my throat. Swiftly, I steer the truck back down the route I came, but I can't shake off the feeling of unseen eyes burning into the back of my head. Whatever it was still watching me. I knew it, 100%. Later at the ranger station, Jim told tales of old Native American legends, stories of creatures that could mimic voices, shape-shift, and control minds. He called it a skinwalker. For the first time, I'm seriously considering the possibility. How else can I explain the almost supernatural events of that night? The national park now feels different. The solitude I used to crave now seems intimidating. I've seen a different side of nature, wild and maybe even dangerous. Now, every night patrol since then has been a battle with fear. Every rustle in the bushes, every flickering shadow feels like a prelude to another spine-chilling encounter. But as long as there are people in the park, somebody has to keep them safe. I guess the chilling encounter served as a raw reminder of this nerve-wracking aspect of the job. But I still love how wild and beautiful the park is. I've simply learned a greater respect for the mysterious forces lurking in the wilderness. Hi there, my name is Mike, and this all happened to me up in Kootenay National Park in Canada. Have you heard of it? It's in the eastern part of British Columbia, about 30 minutes or so west of Banff. Anyway, it has massive forests and mountains, and it's the kind of place where you can really lose yourself or find something you aren't looking for. So I'm out there doing a bit of hiking, a bit of camping, just me in the great outdoors. I've been doing this sort of thing for as long as I can remember. I set up camp near Marble Canyon. It's a gorgeous place if you ever get the chance to get there. The first couple of days were just the usual hiking, cooking some basic grub, trying to get some decent photos with my Canon. Now, I've heard stories for sure about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, but I never paid them much mind. But this one night, things got weird, and I think I saw a real one. It was late, real late. The fire was down to embers. I was about to turn in when I heard this noise. Not your usual forest noise. This was heavy, like something big moving through the trees. I figured maybe a bear or a moose, but it didn't feel right. There was a kind of rhythm to it, almost like footsteps. I grabbed my flashlight, and man, I wish I hadn't. The beam cut through the darkness, and that's when I saw it. This thing, this creature, it was huge, covered in hair, standing on two legs, just at the edge of the trees. Its eyes caught the light shining back at me. I've seen bears before, but this was no bear. I was just staring at this thing, and it is staring back at me. We must have been like that for eons. And then it made this sound, but it wasn't aggressive, more like curious, I would say. So there I was, heart pounding like crazy, flashlight shaking in my hand. I had just seen something that, well, it just didn't fit with anything I knew about the woods. I kept the flashlight trained on the trees where I'd seen the creature, hoping maybe it'd come back. But nothing. Just shadows and the odd flicker of light on leaves. I was starting to doubt myself, thinking maybe my mind was playing tricks. Too many campfire stories in my memory bank. But then I heard it again. That sound, like heavy steps, but this time it was moving around the camp. Not fast, but deliberate, like it was, circling me. My instincts were screaming to get out of there, but I was rooted to the spot. I called out, not sure why. Maybe I hoped it was someone messing with me, though deep down, I knew it wasn't. No reply. Just the sound of those steps moving in the dark. Then, as quick as it started, it stopped. Everything went silent again. I waited, not daring to move, until daylight hit. The light made the forest seem normal again, like the whole thing had been a bad dream, but I knew it wasn't. The ground around my camp was all churned up, huge footprints everywhere, and they were fresh. Now, I've done my share of tracking. I can tell deer prints from bear prints, but these indescribable. Too big for a bear, and the stride was all wrong. They were like, well, human, but huge, like something out of a storybook. I followed them for a while, curious despite myself. They led deeper into the woods, away from the trails and any paths I knew. Every step took me further from where I was supposed to be, but I couldn't help it. I needed to see, to understand. The prints led to a clearing, and that's where I found it. Not the creature, but something else. A kind of shelter, I guess. Big, made of branches and foliage, like nothing I've ever seen. It was too deliberate to be natural, too well made. I got this feeling, like I was being watched, like I'd found something I wasn't supposed to. I didn't stay long. Took a few photos, then got out of there. The whole way back to camp, I felt like something was following me. But every time I looked back, there was nothing. Just the weird feeling. The whole way, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that massive figure looming behind me. But there was nothing. Just the usual sounds of the forest gradually coming back to life. When I got back to my car, I just sat there for a while, trying to process everything. The photos I'd taken, the footprints, that shelter, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. I knew I had stumbled onto something extraordinary, something most people wouldn't believe. Once I got back to civilization, the first thing I did was look up anything I could find about Sasquatch sightings in the Kootenay area. Turns out there were more than a few stories, some recent, some going way back. It was like falling down a rabbit hole, Each story was different, but there were similarities, little details that matched up with what I'd experienced. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to go back to find out more. But at the same time, there was this sense of, like a warning. Like maybe some things are meant to stay hidden, secrets that aren't ours to uncover. I showed the photos to a few people I trusted, asked what they thought. Most figured it was a bear or some other animal, just seen from a weird angle. But a couple of them, they looked at those pictures and went quiet, like they knew something they weren't saying. The whole experience, it changed something in me. I used to think I knew the woods, that there were no real mysteries left out there. But now, I'm not so sure. There's a part of me that wants to go back, to find that shelter again, maybe even catch a glimpse of the creature. But another part of me knows it's better to let some mysteries be. So, that's it. That's my story. Believe it or not, it's what happened to me out there in the national park. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What else might be out there, just beyond the light of our campfires, watching from the shadows? What do you think? Should I go back someday, try to find it again, or just leave it as one of those stories you tell around the fire, a mystery to ponder but never solve? It happened a couple of years ago during the fall in Estell Manor Park, right here in New Jersey. I've always been a night owl and always loved how peaceful, yet kind of eerie the park gets at night. I like walking at night, being surrounded by nature too. Estell Manor Park in particular has been my go-to spot over the years. It was my spot to unwind after long days fixing pipes and stuff. After a day filled listening to clanging pipes and being covered in water, I really needed something to balance it out. I love the stillness of those nights. Over the years, I'd heard about the local legends and myths, especially the one that seemed to have every second kid in the neighborhood terrified. Yep, I'm talking about the Jersey Devil. There were always stories about this creature, a real beast, they said, that haunted the woods. Kids would talk about it at campfires or whisper about it during sleepovers. I always thought those stories were just to scare us kids. Anyway, back to that fall night. I remember it was a clear night. The moon shining down brightly through the bare branches of the trees, casting long, freaky shadows. All I heard was the wind in the leaves and an owl somewhere far off. I took the usual trail that snaked through the park, leading me away from the sporadic lights of the city, deeper into the heart of the woods. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and earth. It felt refreshing to walk along the dimly lit path, seeing my breath fog up a bit in front of me. As I was walking, I felt uneasy. Now, this wasn't my first nighttime stroll. I knew what to expect usually. A fleeting rustle as a critter scampered across fallen leaves. The occasional snap of a twig somewhere deep in the woods. These were routine, part of the charm of my midnight walks. But this time, something was off. Suddenly, it got way too quiet. It felt like even the wind stopped, and like the air was too thick or something. Then, I felt a certain sense of unease. The calm around me shattered when I saw a shadow, larger than any creature that was supposed to be in these parts. There was a certain beast-like quality to it as it looked like it was hunched over, but I wasn't really sure. I could sort of make out a large frame, standing what seemed like 6 feet tall, with a dark silhouette against the moonlight. It was too far off to really make out any details, but it didn't look or move like any animal I'd come across during my many years of night walks. It's no surprise that I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. But whatever it was that I was dreading, I couldn't quite put my finger on because I still didn't know if this thing was real. It was then that I heard a rustling sound, the kind of sound you'd associate with wings. But it was a deeper echoing sound, making the silence feel even weirder. And with it came this strong sulfur smell that hit my nose and made me instantly tense up. I squinted into the dark, trying to make out that shadowy figure again. Suddenly, I watched as it seemed to pause and pivot so that it faced me directly. Right then, the moon came out from behind a cloud, and what I saw was so weird it still gives me chills. The creature stood tall, looking exactly as I had imagined from the haunting silhouette. But its demeanor was even more terrifying. Its head was something freaky, like a mix of a horse and some kind of goblin, with a long tongue and glowing red eyes that cut through the dark right at me. It looked kind of skeletal, with dark, scaly skin that stood out in the moonlight. What I remember most distinctly, though, were its wings. The creature was undoubtedly winged. Its arms, if you can call them that, were bat-like or dragon-like, or both. I couldn't tell. I was so scared and shocked. I couldn't think straight. I knew I should run, but I just couldn't. Seeing this thing for real, something I always thought was just a story, really shook me up. It was one thing to hear about it and laugh it off, but seeing it in real life was something else. Suddenly, it let out a high-pitched shriek, snapping me out of my frozen state, and I dove into the bushes off the trail. I could barely hear anything over my heart pounding in my ears, not even its steps or the flapping. I lay in that bush for a long time, heart pounding, every nerve on edge until the night around me finally fell silent once more. When I dared to move, I slowly crept out of the underbrush, making my way back to the trail. My mind was racing a mile a minute, trying to reconcile what I had seen, but failing to find a rational explanation. The thing I'd seen fit every description of the Jersey Devil that I'd ever heard, both its physical attributes and the oppressive aura that surrounded it. The sulfur smell still hung heavy in the air, offering further confirmation to the tales. I decided to call it a night and head home, and needless to say, it was weeks before I took another nighttime stroll. Even now, I can't help but look over my shoulder a bit more often when I walk at night in the park. I don't doubt the stories about the Jersey Devil anymore. It's like something from a storybook walked right into my life. Frankly, some nights I still wonder if it was just a nightmare. But now, whenever I catch any smell of sulfur, it brings me right back to that day. And with that memory, every single horrifying second comes right back into my brain. I've always said that there's no better place to be on Halloween night than Salem, Massachusetts, with its witchcraft history and all. The streets were packed with tourists in costumes and decorations everywhere. You'd even spot a few dressed as witches, brooms and all. walking on the cobblestones. That night, I was on the local patrol team, making sure everyone stayed safe. It seemed like the right choice at the time, giving up my own Halloween hijinks to put on a badge and gear up for patrol. I grew up here in Salem. I always felt like I owed it to my hometown to keep it safe, especially on a night like Halloween. My shift started with the usual checking up on the town's major sites, making sure things didn't get too rowdy, the local trick-or-treaters being coaxed out of lingering too long by candy bowls, and occasionally nudging an over-enthusiastic partygoer into a cab. It was a cool night. The moon was hiding behind the fog, giving everything an eerie look. The flickering lanterns by the doorways were casting these long shadows that could really play tricks on your mind. A significant part of my watch included the historic sites from the witch trials. Maybe it was my childhood fascination with the gruesome tales and my affinity for horror novels. But I had a soft spot for these spots. Each of these places had its own story, like ghosts from the past, which made my Halloween patrol kind of an adventure. After a quick coffee break, I headed towards the historic district. It was weirdly quiet, not like the busy streets I was used to. It's weird how a place that's so lively in the day can get so quiet and spooky at night. I thought nothing of it. After all, everyone was likely at the main event downtown. The area was lit by a few dim lamps that threw hazy shadows across the brick houses. In this dull light, everything appeared distorted. The decorated pumpkins seemed to grin menacingly, and the hanging witch effigies swung and creaked ominously in the chill wind. I've walked by these places a lot, but that night, something felt off. I started to feel this chill, like something wasn't right, and it kind of replaced the excitement I had earlier. It felt akin to being watched, but when I turned around, there was barely anything to see save for the dim street and old buildings. I was about to call it a night, thinking I was just tired, when I saw something weird out of the corner of my eye. An odd, dark figure moved past an alley without making a single sound. Now, anyone else might dismiss it as a trick of the light, a play of the shadow, or perhaps a late-night partygoer. But this wasn't my first dance in the shadows of Salem. There was something else pulling me towards the mystery of the night. I decided to trust my gut and headed into the alley, pulling out my flashlight as I went. The alley felt creepy and quiet, except for the rustling of leaves that cut through the silence. I felt a deep dread as I walked down the brick-lined alley. The distant laughter and music of the party downtown could hardly penetrate the heavy silence that had descended upon the street. It felt like I stepped into another world, everything so tense and unsettling. If the chill night wind hadn't been briskly circling my stiff limbs, the dread alone would have triggered the hairs at the back of my neck to stand on end. I tried to tell myself I was just tired, shake off the nerves. Yet, even amidst my internal war, the inexplicable pull towards the shadowy figure was too strong to ignore. As I gradually made my way down the brooding narrow pathway, flashlight piercing the darkness, I came face to face with the figure. It was huge, with twisted horns and broad shoulders, easily twice my size. Its claws were sharp, ready for action, and under the flashlight, the heavy smell of brimstone and sulfur was almost suffocating. The figure was shrouded in darkness. The only features that stood out were its blazing eyes. Two glowing orbs, vibrant in an otherworldly shade of red, stared right back at me. That was when it suddenly struck me. This was no mask. I realized with a shock that this was no costume. What I had presumed to be a partygoer in an exceptional makeup now seemed anything but human. Fear gripped me, colder than the chill in the air. The thing, this demon, growled and looked like it was about to jump at me. Frozen, my heart was pounding in my ears. It felt like an eternity before my own instincts finally screamed to run. With legs made of lead, I stumbled back onto the main path, the stench of brimstone replaced by the familiar smells of autumn. Sweat trailed down my brow, my heart hammering almost painfully against my ribs. Home was a haven, and I holed up for the rest of the night, every creak and knock making me jump. Questions upon questions spun around in my mind. What was the demon doing here? Did anybody else see it? Was I in danger? At daybreak, I mustered the courage to revisit the alley, finding nothing but the regular dumpsters and brick walls. No sulfur, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. It felt as though the whole thing was a nightmare. But the lingering smell of burned flesh on my service jacket was proof enough that it was anything but a dream. I knew Salem always had a flair for the supernatural. But this encounter, it was on a whole different level. It left me with a profound fear and a strange fascination over time. I'm still patrolling Salem, half expecting to bump into something strange again. For now, though, my demon story is a hit at campfires. Just another spooky tale from Salem. A few years ago, I decided to go camping alone in West Virginia. The state is absolutely breathtaking if you ask me. Or, as the state's license plates say, wild and beautiful. Anyway, I chose Blackwater Falls State Park as my getaway spot. I've been into nature since my grandpa showed me how to fish and camp. For me, there's nothing like a backpacking trip to feel grounded. You know how it is. Sometimes you just need a break from it all. Turns out, I picked one of the best autumn weekends that year for my trip. The trees were amazing with their autumn colors, and there was something special about the cool air and the sunlight filtering through the leaves. It was really quiet, like it usually is out in those woods. The first day was spent, as most first days of camping are, setting up my campsite and learning the surrounding area. Hurrying the setup takes the fun out of it, so I took my sweet time, securing my tent, prepping my fishing gear, and gathering firewood. I had to make sure my setup was good since I was alone. Before evening, I made my way to the Blackwater River, the perfect spot to fish. The river was quiet as I spent the next few hours fishing in solitude. I would be lying if I said I wasn't a bit disappointed when the sun submerged into the horizon, before I even got a decent bite. The pending darkness was making me have to pack it all up and head back to the campsite. This day, everything felt different once the darkness started. The normal daytime sounds were gone, replaced by this deep, kind of spooky quiet. A quiet that can make the hairs at the back of your neck dance a weird little jig. To shake off the creeps about what might be out there, I heated some canned stew and distracted myself eating by the fire. As it got darker, the fire felt more and more important. The fire wasn't just for warmth. It also felt like protection against the night's creepiness. Sitting by the fire, I couldn't help but feel some fear creep up on me. Nothing really preempted the weird sensation. There was no growl or screech that ripped through the forest. There was no ominous rustling in the bush or a sudden drop in temperature. It was just a sense, an instinctual understanding of an imbalance in the environment, something that hinted towards a strange presence. Being alone in the wilderness primes you for such instincts. You start perceiving things you wouldn't have noticed otherwise. The first thing I actually noticed was this weird smell, really sharp and out of place. Almost like an undefined entity was now a part of my experience. As I prepared to hit the sack, the mystery of what it could be weighed heavily. But little did I know then, the unknown had just started to stir. That night that I had hoped would be a peaceful sleep away from all my problems was anything but. My dreams were filled with a strange figure, large, ominous, and distinctly inhuman. I woke up, heart racing and covered in sweat and goosebumps. The silence was so intense, it felt eerie. Instantly, I noticed random whispers faintly around me. It sounded sort of like the wind rustling through trees, but creepier. Every whisper gave me goosebumps. I was all on edge, feeling a cold dread. I'm more of a logical person, trying to find reason than latching onto the idea of spirits being present. Animals, I thought, maybe foxes or raccoons. But the rational explanation did little to stop the rising panic. Even as I tried to fight the dread creeping in, my peripheral vision caught some movement. A hulking shadow, nearly 9 feet tall, that had gone unnoticed in the darkness until now. Not too deep in the woods, yet too close for comfort. I blinked, forcing my hands to maintain a grip on my flashlight. It's just a tree, a tall, weirdly shaped tree. Yeah, but my imagination was running wild. Every small sound was sending chills down my spine. The shadowy figure seemed to stick around, never completely revealing itself, yet never fully disappearing. It felt as if it was playing with my fears, taking pleasure in terrifying me. In my head, this tree-like thing turned into all kinds of horrible possibilities, making me feel sick with fear. I couldn't sleep all night, kept looking out of my tent, and that figure seemed to be always there. I huddled in the far corner of my tent, praying to just about every god I could think of, too afraid to leave the tent. As dawn finally came, whatever had been out there was now gone, and surprisingly, even to myself, I finally fell asleep. Upon waking, hours later, midday sun above me, I finally left the tent and looked around. There was still no trace of the hideous silhouette. The woods were back to being the welcoming haven I knew them to be. The whispers? Gone. The smell of decaying flesh. It was replaced by the musky smell of damp leaves and pine trees. Looking back, the whole thing kind of feels like a dream, like it didn't really happen. But I still felt like a brave kid from town who just lived through a real-life horror movie. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Eventually, I came to understood that what I saw was a Wendigo. I mostly based that on info from the stories my grandpa used to tell. I couldn't wrap my mind around it then. And now, all these years later, I know what he was talking about. Unfortunately, he's passed and I can't talk to him about it as an adult. But I really do feel that he's up there watching over me. And maybe, just maybe, that's why I'm still here today. It happened when I was working the night shift as a park patrol officer in Central Park. New York's always buzzing, but at night, Central Park's a different world. It feels like this happened to me just yesterday, though it's been years. It was a basic night patrol job, just making sure folk weren't up to anything they shouldn't be, and generally maintaining peace. I often stop by the Bethesda fountain on my rounds. During the day, it's full of life. Tourists, entertainers, locals. But at night, it's just the angel of the waters in the middle of an empty space. Kinda spooky, but beautiful. As I approached the Bethesda fountain, I couldn't shake off this strange humming sensation. Hard to explain. I just figured it was the night air and kept going. That's when I saw it. It was tall, kind of looked like a person, but not really. While I was trying to make sense of what I saw, my flashlight flickered and died, and the thing turned my way. It looked like it wasn't walking, more like drifting. Sounds crazy, I know, but it gets weirder. The figure, it was translucent, a misty figure, like the residual breath on a window, but shaped like a person. I could see the fountain through it. I couldn't just turn around and leave, could I? My heart was racing, but I couldn't move. Maybe it was my training, or just how weird it all was. Either way, I stood my ground, my feet firmly planted in front of the Bethesda fountain. Then, my flashlight came back on and lit up the figure more clearly. Its features were still ambiguous, being, well, not really solid, but it was as if it carried the impression of a face. Sort of human-like, but not quite. Every time the wind blew, it kind of rippled, like water. It was completely silent around me, until all of a sudden, I heard the faint sound, a whisper almost. At first, I thought it might be my radio crackling, trying to pull through some late-night discussion from the station. But then, I noticed the sound was coming from the figure. It was a raspy kind of whisper. I couldn't make out what it was saying. Suddenly, I felt a chill, but weirdly, the trees didn't move. Not a single leaf moved. I rubbed my arms to bring back some heat, the whisper from the figure turning into a low hum. It's safe to say, that's one patrol night I'll never forget. Not in a million years. I couldn't move. Didn't want to even blink just for the fear of missing what was about to happen next. As the figure got closer, it had this weird quiet around it, almost numbing. The whispers grew louder, the figure nearly floating as it moved, passing right through the goddamn fountain. I had to physically shake my head to believe what I was seeing. Then it turned what you might call its face towards me. It was more like a vague shape, really. I squinted, forcing my deteriorating courage to hold strong, trying to make out what it seemed to be. I remembered hearing spooky stories around campfires, but this was way scarier, making me question everything I believed. And then, as if on cue, the whispers condensed into something resembling words. Words that I couldn't understand, a language foreign to my senses. Yet, the sense of despair, of an anguish unreleased, was evident. I found myself whispering back, too shocked to even panic. The humming got so loud that the trees seemed to shake. And then, as mysteriously as it had appeared, the figure started to dissolve, blending with the chilly night air. And then it was gone, leaving nothing but this empty echo hanging in the air. I stood there long after the figure had disappeared, in front of Bethesda Fountain, under the uncaring gaze of the angel of the waters. Was I losing it? Had I just imagined all this? I couldn't catch a complete thought as they spun wildly in my mind. For days I kept thinking about the cold, the whispers, and that glow. At times, I'd find myself instinctively avoiding glances at the spot the figure once stood, the feeling a cross between terror and intrigue. There were days I wanted to quit my job, to leave behind the haunting whispers of uncertainty, and then curiosity would pull me back. Maybe it was my duty as an officer, or just plain curiosity, but I needed to find out more. On subsequent nights, I found myself drawn towards Bethesda. There were no more spectral figures or whispering echoes. The air was normal again, and that figure just a memory, but I always felt like someone or something was watching me. I decided to change my usual route, not because I was scared but more out of respect, and gave Bethesda a wide berth. Now, years have passed. I still work the night shift though. I requested for a change in my beat. The park still holds its tranquility, and Bethesda still stands majestic as ever. But to me, the memories of the spectral figure, the chilling whispers, continue to haunt. These days, I'm more careful, more open to stuff I can't explain. After all, in the dead of night, you never know what's out there. This happened on a chilly winter's night about 2 years back. Still can't shake it off, honestly. I was on patrol duty out in Bardstown, Kentucky. Places like home away from home, historic and peaceful. But that night, the silence was eerie. Being an officer, you get the hang of the usual sounds and rhythms. The day turning into night, all that. It was foggy, like it often is in winter, but way too quiet. It was as if the world had muted suddenly. It felt like the town itself was holding its breath, and I was just along for the ride. Patrolling the misty lanes of the historic downtown, a chill ran up my spine. Bardstown's a nice little town, with old brick buildings and cozy places that take you back. I'd walked these streets 1,000 times before, but the dense fog clinging to the stoops of the antique boutiques and dimly lit bar fronts gave the town a mysterious, ghostly atmosphere. There were none of the usual night sounds, no chatter from the bars, not even dogs barking. The only sound that accompanied my footsteps was the distant hooting of an owl, a haunting lullaby to an otherwise dreamless world. Although I couldn't shake the eerie feeling, I continued my route as usual, keeping a keen eye out for any significant disturbances. In the dense fog, the buildings loomed like shadows, and the street lamps were dim through the fog. The only comfort in that chilling silence was the soft, glowing porch lights that dotted the misty streets. They were like beacons, guiding me through the fog. I remember thinking just how out of place the streetlight by Moray's bar looked, flickering in the eerie quiet of the night, casting eerie shadows down the empty road. Marching through this ghost town, the unsettling feeling was a steady crescendo. I had a gut feeling that something was about to happen. And then it came, the deafening silence shattered by the bone-chilling sound of a guttural growl. It echoed through the haunting foggy night, a chilling symphony that stirred the silent town. It was a low, menacing sound, like something from deep underground. It was a snarl, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to seep through the fog-laden air. After that growl, there was this nasty smell, really ruined the fresh, foggy air. A horrible stench hit me, like rotten eggs mixed with something burning. The smell was so bad it made me flinch. It was then I knew in my bones something was off. My grip tightened around my flashlight, the cool metal offering minimal comfort against the tear-inducing stench and the frightful sounds reverberating in my ears. I took a deep breath and pushed on into the fog, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. My heart was racing as the mist swirled around the beam of my flashlight, the darkness beyond it a grim testament to the unknown. I heard that growl again, louder this time, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. As I followed the growls, the unsettling sensation grew with every step, and yet I pressed on. Suddenly, it got warmer, like I was standing too close to a fire. Imagine the crackling warmth of a bonfire in the dead of winter. The smell got worse, like rotting stuff and sulfur, like something bad was coming, something I wasn't ready for. Turning towards the sudden heat, my flashlight beam cut through the fog onto a creature straight out of my worst nightmares. I'm not easily scared, but this was something else. It was like something out of those old ghost stories. It was a monstrous figure, rearing to a stupendous height of 5 feet at its shoulders. It moved through the fog, its dark red fur almost glowing. The beast moved strong and smooth, like it meant business. I remember its eyes, brilliant and fiery, like glowing coals in the dead of night. Those eyes were wild, promising nothing good, cutting through the fog. I froze when it looked right at me. And then, the beast opened its jaws. It opened its mouth, showing rows of sharp teeth. They glinted within the jaws, each sharp serrated point glittering with deadly precision. Looked sharp enough to tear through anything, even metal. A low growl rumbled from within, a sound that echoed long in my mind and still does to this day. I can't erase the memory of that encounter, no matter how hard I try. I barely managed to escape, relying on instinct and adrenaline to get me back to that damn patrol car. I radioed in, barely able to speak, and then drove like crazy to get back to safety. But I left a piece of myself on that foggy lane, swallowed whole by the savage beast known only in folklore as the hellhound. I barely slept that night, and when I did, I dreamt of glowing eyes and a monstrous figure emerging from the fog. The following day, I returned to that spot during daylight, a vain attempt to assure myself that it was just a figment of my imagination. The eerie silence, the spectral fog, the formidable shadow lurking within the dark, it all seemed like a surreal dream in daylight, devoid of the chilling memories of the previous night. What escalated my fear and curiosity, though, were the claw marks etched in the tarmac where the creature had materialized, the scraped and charred earth a grim testament to the reality of the previous night. I wasn't hallucinating or dreaming. I'd seen something, a creature of lore, a hellhound. The encounter shook me to my very core. Bardstown has never been the same place since that night, its charm corrupted by the memory of that nightmarish creature. Now, whenever it's foggy, I think about that night. It's like a constant reminder that there's more to this town than meets the eye. I often wonder, are we truly alone? Or is the world a lot stranger than we think?